Welcome back. Welcome back. Ed Martin here on the Pro America Report, and time to catch up with my old friend Mark Mix. And Mark Mix has been a busy man. There's a lot happening right now. I got a text from one of his colleagues alerting me that there was a story to talk about. Of course, Mark Mix is the president of the National Right to Work Committee. Almost 3 million members in that public policy organization. He's also the president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. Keeps him busy. And Joe Biden, among the many things people don't realize, I think, in this last couple of years, Joe Biden's presidency has been radically pro-big labor. I mean, he has said before to people, bragging that, hey, there's a teachers union member in the White House, meaning his wife. But in lots of ways, Joe Biden's administration has been and he brags about it, the most pro-big labor government we've had in a long, long time. So, Mark, welcome back. First of all, what about the news that Joe Biden's running for re-election? How'd you feel about that?
Well, obviously, union officials here in Washington, I guess, are jubilant about that because there's more that he has to do, apparently. But Ed, thanks for, first of all, having me on and talking about these important issues. And you got it exactly right. When you talked about Biden's pledge to be the most pro-union president, it wasn't being pro-worker. It wasn't even being pro-union worker. It was being pro-big labor. You got it right. You framed it right. And that's exactly what's happened over the last couple of years with his administration. And the story just gets more difficult each day. That's for sure.
You know, Mark, we're talking again, Mark Mix, and I'll put up on social media links to his work. nrtw.org is one of the websites with that's the Legal Defense Fund there. But Mark, the newest piece of this is the next Secretary of Labor. So Julie Su, S-U is her last name, comes out of California. That's probably all you need to know. But more specifically, we'll get into it. But before we get to that, the first Secretary of Labor was the Boston mayor, right? And was it Walsh, Mayor Marty Walsh? Is that his name? I'm getting it wrong, or some Irish name.
Yep. No, you're exactly right. Marty Walsh was his name.
And he came out of the labor movement. Was he pushed out? Did he go for a better job? I know he went to a big job, but did he go for a better job to get out, or was he pushed out? Was he not actually radical enough?
Well, I think that there may be something to that. And, you know, he was a building trades guy up in Boston. He was the Boston mayor. He basically made Boston a union town. Not that he had to work too hard at that, but the bottom line was it was a pretty good perch, and he'd been a longtime friend of Biden's. He came down to Washington. What I think, Ed, and I think your hypothesis is correct, he didn't push fast enough and far enough for the likes of organized labor and the big labor bosses here in D.C. So they had to step up their game. And, you know, the Democrats were pushing Biden to have an Asian American on the cabinet. It wasn't quite filled out from a diversification standpoint or diversity standpoint. So, you know, it's now your ethnicity that's your qualification, not your ability to do the job. And certainly with Julie Su, there are some real questions about whether or not she can actually do the job.
Again, our guest is Mark Mix, who heads up the National Right to Work Legal Defense Fund, and also is, of course, the president of the National Right to Work Committee. Almost 3 million members over there. That's what I was going to say. I think, look, when I was in St. Louis and did a lot of work, I was Board of Elections chairman and all. You did have this difference between this sort of radical big labor that wanted to expand. I think that's where this Secretary Su comes out of, and then guys like Marty Walsh, who, although radically big labor, they want to build stuff. They actually wanted jobs. I mean, you know, over in California where the nominee, and you'll have to update me on where the nomination for this Secretary Su is in the process. But out in California, they were doing this thing where they're cracking down on independent contractors, right? And you're not going to get away with being an independent contractor. Small business, usually, almost always solo practitioner. That's the definition of it. And they're saying, no, you got to be unionized, got to go by these rules, you got to pay these dues, you got to be part of the system. I mean, that's the stuff that really grinds this economy to a halt.
Absolutely. And really, that's one of the major issues right now in the debate over Julie Su's nomination. They had a hearing, I think it was last week, Ed. There's going to be a vote tomorrow in the Senate Labor Committee that's run by Bernie Sanders on whether or not she will advance to the floor of the Senate. It's pretty clear, I think, she'll get out of committee and she will end up on the floor. When they have the vote on the floor is yet to be determined, because I think they're going to have to really work a lot harder for the votes to get her passed as Secretary of Labor than they did to get her to be the Deputy Secretary of Labor. She had 47 votes cast against her on that vote. But Ed, you're on top of the news, even though you don't know it. You're absolutely right. in California, the Assembly Bill 5, as it was known, and is now the law out there, basically said that if you were a photographer, if you were a writer, if you were, a translator, someone who had an independent job and you were kind of hired for one-off jobs and you did this stuff, or even a musician or even an owner-operator truck driver, that somehow that status was not appropriate and you had to be an employee. And Ed, your spider instincts are great because independent contractors can't be unionized, but guess what? Employees can. And so AB5 made a change in the definition of who could be an independent contractor and what that was. And basically the drive was to convert these people into employees, and how it manifested itself in the ports, for example, at Long Beach and Los Angeles, those two big ports out there on the West Coast.
Right.
Basically, if you were an independent operator running trucks off the port, you had to be an employee in order to pick up loads and deliver loads to the port after AB5 got in. And the protest came from the truck drivers themselves against this, because a lot of these guys, as you probably mentioned and knew, they bought their first truck. They may have a second truck or a third truck, and there's their family members that are driving them, and they're a small business, but yet now they have to be employees. And so I think it was something like 70,000 independent owner-operator truck drivers left California and stopped doing business there because of what Julie Su was the architect of when she was the Secretary of Labor out there in California.
We're talking again with Mark Mix about the state of this nomination for Secretary of Labor. Mark, more broadly, pulling back up for sort of above one appointment. I know one appointment can be, massively influential, but how do you see the economy right now? I mean, we got a lot of headwinds, right? With inflation, we've got changes in the information, economy. How are you feeling about the economy? What are your members seeing and feeling?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. And I got a note from one of our friends in a particular state just yesterday, and he was saying, we can't find anyone to work. And you'd think that if that was the problem, that things would be going relatively well. But the reason why they can't find anyone that wants to work is because the government's been taking care of people for the last, 3 years, basically, or the last 2.5 at least. And that goes to the Julie Su nomination as well. One of the other issues dealing with this nomination is the fraud and the misrepresentation that went on out in California while she was in charge. Something like $30 to $40 billion in fraud, where money was going to murderers and Russian cartels and just absolute, pranksters and thieves and fraudsters in California. And, she's coming back here to basically or it's been nominated to run an organization that's the mothership of all that stuff. And so I think, the economy has there's this drag that we're beginning to feel, and I'm beginning to see it here at Right to Work. Our folks are very generous, but we're the disposable part of disposable income. And so the way we see it, things are slowing down a little bit. And I think it probably is going to get a little bit worse. And, Joe Biden would have us believe that his energy policy has nothing to do with high energy prices, that unbelievable government spending has nothing to do with inflation, and that their border policies have nothing to do with crime and fentanyl. So I don't know what to believe, but you kind of see it with your own eyes, Ed.
Mark Mix, our guest again. Mark, you mentioned something there at the end. How do we even process the problem of the border in terms of the impact on labor? I mean, I know you and your long career, and you've been somebody, part of the sort of mindset of your work is, hey, let people figure out how to work for what they're working for. Don't make them pay dues when they don't want to be a part of it. Don't make them be mandatorily in unions if they don't want. If they want to, fine. But kind of make America is you figure it out, and you figure entrepreneurial stuff, sometimes big business. We got millions and millions and millions of workers coming into our system, and it's not even that we're regulating. I don't want to sound like I'm calling for regulation. We just don't even know up from down in the economy. How do we handle that?
It's interesting, Ed, you mentioned that, because if you go back into history, back maybe the 1980s even, 1970s, and certainly at that point, it was organized labor that was one of the biggest, opponents of kind of this immigration process. And frankly, because they were trying to protect the jobs of rank and file union members across the country. Now, interestingly enough, union officials are some of the leading proponents of the so-called open borders policy that we're seeing. And I think that's a reflection of the change in the workplace from, manufacturing jobs that were exported after Bill Clinton, who was a union favorite, started, sending manufacturing companies overseas. But now the unions are trying to organize kind of the lowest level of the service economy and other industries that, will provide dues revenue. But in order to do that, they have no problem with a border that seems to be wide open. I know rank and file union members do, absolutely, but union officials don't. And those are the folks that are backing Joe Biden and this crazy policy that really, as you mentioned, Ed, is causing real trouble and will cause more trouble for the American workforce.
Well, and as you know, Mark, I mean, the thing is that one of the worst parts about this is that everybody says play by the rules and you get ahead, and then you look up and you say, wait, they're ignoring the rules. I mean, they're enforcing this set of rules and that set of rules and demanding this set of new rules. And as to the basics of the law, forget about whether we don't have to get into anything dramatic like January 6th or anything. Just go to the basics of a border, and then they'll demand of businesses that you be penalized for employing workers who are not e-verified when the system can't even manage the border itself. It's worse than confusing, but it looks like, as we've seen with this nomination of Joe Biden, Julie Su to be Secretary of Labor, that's what they want. It's not. This isn't a miscalculation or a malfunction. It's a feature of their people. It's a feature of their policies. So, Mark Mix, let me say thank you. I've got to run. It's National Right to Work Committee, almost 3 million members of that public policy organization. He's also the president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. If you go to nrtw.org, there's a lot of there. NRTW, that stands for National Right to Work, nrtw.org. Thank you, Mark, for your time.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate it.